Hey guys, thanks for tuning in. This is going to be part 2 of my timing chain and rod bearing / oil pan gasket DIY series. If you guys missed the first part, I'll put a link in the description and also make this part of a playlist where I had my oil pump chain fail on me along with the tensioner. I need to get the tow hook out of my trunk to screw into the engine to be able to hold it up. This threads in right here. So I want to remove this fan shroud now. This car is a manual, but it used to be an automatic, so I have the automatic transmission cooler that bolts to the bottom of the fan shroud. So I'm going to undo that from below and slide this up and out. To be able to show you what I'm doing here, I'm going to remove the inlet, the front inlet. Now that we have the inlet out of the way, I'm going to use a T60 on an extension to remove the belt. Now I'm using a T50. I'm removing the E10 bolts that hold the crankshaft pulley to the crank. Now I'm going to attempt to remove the crankshaft pulley. There's a look at the crank hub itself. I'm going to clean up the surface and then we'll come back. I'm going to get these pulleys out of the way as well. So I spent some time cleaning up the front of the engine so that when I pop off seals and whatnot, dirt won't get inside the engine. I'm taking a 22mm socket, putting it on the crankshaft. I'm going to rotate the motor over until this is ready to be locked down. We have a QR code on both camshafts facing up. That means we're at TDC on cylinder 1. So we can go ahead and insert the cam block tool. So next up, you're supposed to take this pin here and you're going to go down to under the starter on the side of the block. You don't have to remove the intake manifold as far as I know. There's a little plastic piece that you pull out and you stick this in place and that holds your flywheel or flex plate. Here's my auto flex plate. You basically insert the tool through like so and it would lock the crankshaft in position, so there's no way that you're going to encounter issues, so that it can't move at all. That's not going to be an option for me, unfortunately, because I have a single mass flywheel aftermarket and it doesn't have that hole on the flywheel to lock it in place. Regardless though, you're not supposed to rely on that pin to hold the crankshaft while you're trying to break this bolt free. So I'm going to have to use this flywheel holder to get the job done on my car because I have a single mass flywheel. So I'll link to this if you guys need to purchase this. So before I go for that crank bolt and try to remove it, I'm going to have to make sure that I lock the flywheel from below, which we'll do after. This rubber plug has to be removed. I'm going to try that now. By the way, they make a special tool to do this, but I'm trying to avoid spending a ton on specialty tools with this job. I already bought a couple. So I hope that was pretty self-explanatory. I knocked a hole in this with a punch, and I screwed just a little bit, and I used vice grips and a pry bar to get it out to avoid any specialty tools. Here's the chain for the oil pump. That's not what you want to see. I can see the point of failure here. My guide is missing on the side. I want to remove that sprocket off the chain. Okay, so they make a special tool that uses a bolt for the tensioner and actually grips onto two places on this pulley here, and I don't have that tool. So unfortunately I have to do something a little bit ghetto and hold it with a screwdriver. So for you guys that are freaking out in the comments that I would do that, understood, I'm with you, but I don't want to spend another 60 or 80 bucks on a tool to hold that when I can trust the fact that this thing is hardened and reinforced and designed to be held by two spots anyway. So one screwdriver on an angle is not really going to hurt anything. But I'll check that for straightness when I take it out. If it's not perfect, then I'm going to replace it anyway. Pulley. So here's that pulley. It's still perfect. No cracks on it, and it's dead straight. So that method I showed you will work. But I'm not going to recommend it. You guys use your discretion. There is a proper way to do it. There's a special tool for it. But if you were to buy all the specialty tools for this car, then it would be very expensive. Even just popping off that front little cap, they make a special tool for it. But at the end of the day, I'm not using that. I'm not using a crank seal tool also. I'll show you what I end up doing. So I have a long extension going down to a swivel head 16 right beside the charge pipe. There's a nut on top of the motor mount. I have a couple videos where I address this and I show you in detail. So I'm going to link those in the description. One where I show you how to remove a subframe, and it covers this in great detail. There's the 16 nut that I just went after. There's the other nut. Again, like I said, I'm going to put a link in the description for a video where I show you how to remove the subframe if you want to see me pointing down to where they are, but it's pretty self-explanatory. Next up, I'm going to get the car jacked up and we'll go underneath and start tackling the subframe. So now how I like to stay safe is I get an oversized 6-ton jack and I have it resting at its most bottom position, so there's nowhere for it to go. My jack pads are already kind of destroyed, so it wedges itself in there really nicely and makes it super secure. I just kind of roll with that. You don't have the pawl and the teeth that could fail and let down on you. There's nowhere else for it to go. But it's already so big because it's a 6-ton for a truck that it's sitting where it needs to sit to get the car up as much as I want anyway. That's the way to stay safe. Now let's get under the vehicle. So by the way, I jacked up from right here. And this piece always gets bent out of shape when you use it to jack up the car, but it should be fine for getting your socket on there still. You know, one thing that's going to be much easier from above, now that we have the radiator fan out of the way, is to go for these two T30 screws that hold the cooling pipe to the subframe. This would only be here if you had an automatic. My car used to be automatic. Getting these from below kind of sucks. And also, having super long extensions is pretty awesome. I'd recommend it. It's a good investment. Now I'm removing these shields. I'm removing this V-brace. They're 16 mil bolts. Removing the sway bar end link, 17 on the outside, 16 on the nut. Now we want to remove these brackets that hold the sway bar in place. Now we'll remove the bolts that hold the steering rack in place. You want a swivel head ratcheting wrench to help hold the top. It's kind of hard to get to otherwise. This is an E12. I just unplugged that connector for the active steering on my car. I'm gonna disconnect these control arms. This is an 18 and the 18 nut on the other side. Same story here. 18 on one side and then an 18 wrench on the other. Going after the tie rod ends. Okay, I'm going to start going after these subframe bolts now. Now we'll start to lower the subframe. All right, there's the subframe removed. Clear access to the oil pan now. So that's the state of my oil and my oil filter. I'm going to clean that up and see if we see any particulate. I think I see a couple tiny specks. All right, guys, I can already tell we have some definite signs of bad news, or kind of what I was expecting. Here's my filter. There are some fragments, definite fragments. It's not good. We have metal fragments. Hopefully that's just chain and sprocket coming apart, but could be the bottom end. So let's get that oil drained out and see how bad that looks, but definitely kind of what I was expecting, but not what I wanted to see. We have metal in here. It's pretty bad. That's nasty. I don't know if we can save this motor at this point. Let's go look at those rod bearings. I would say best case scenario, that was all just chain material and chain gear and nothing got past the filter. Worst case scenario, you see a whole bunch of metal flake in this. While that's draining, I'm gonna disconnect the power steering pump from the oil pan. These are E12s. Up at the front here, there's a 10 mil holding on the transmission cooler lines. Just loosen it a little bit, it'll pull down. There's another one towards the back, 10 mil. You want to disconnect your oil level sensor. And that's pretty much it for to getting access to the pan. First, let's take a look at that oil. So for what it's worth, these are just bubbles on top, but the oil doesn't look horrible. I guess it's somewhat encouraging. Some stuff may have gotten to the filter in the few seconds I didn't have oil pressure, hopefully. But I don't see like a glitter show in the oil. I do see some, but it's pretty minor. Somewhat encouraging. So let's get to pulling the pan down now. So just going after all these E12 aluminum bolts that hold the pan on. These three on the back facing this way are E10s, not E12s. Alright guys, here's the carnage. There's the chain tensioner for the oil pump. That probably went and then took everything else with it. The guide rail. The other half of that tensioner. These are the reinforcements for the back of those chain rails. There's metal shavings. It'd be nice to see that all these metal shavings are just the chain getting beat up because it was flapping around. But we'll know once we get those rod bearings off. This motor might be a goner. Cleaned up the oil pan in preparation for putting this back together. There's the oil after sitting for a while. It really doesn't look terrible. Yeah, it had chunks in there, but I don't have that super fine golden suspension that you'd see with bearing material. I think I found my potential source for all the shavings. If you look at that crank sprocket that drives the timing chain, it's all chewed up. There's bits missing off of it. So that would explain what happened. Basically, a bunch of those shavings fell down into the pan and got into the pickup. So that's kind of encouraging to see that there's a good source for where all the metal came from. Meaning, considering I shut the car off pretty quickly, I don't think all that material we found in the oil filter and in the pan, there wasn't really much in the pan actually, came from the rod bearings. At least there's a chance. So I'm going to conclude this video here. In the next video, we'll be popping the windage tray off in the oil pump and taking out the rod bearings to see if this motor is done or not. If this is the first video you're catching on mine, please consider subscribing. I do upload regularly. Thanks for watching.